Today we're going to be making pepperoni cheese calzone, which is a little bit like pepperoni pizza, but it's also a little bit like a Hot Pocket. I'm going to start by washing my hands. Always want to make sure to do a careful job washing your hands. You've been in other classes, touching desks, touching your own supplies. If you've had a cold or someone that sits at the same desk as you has had a cold, we might pass those germs along to anyone eating the food that we're making. So we always want to be really careful about washing our hands. Remember to dry your hands with your colored towel, and then we set that one aside to not be used for the dishes. Okay, so the first step in our calzone process is to have the sous chef go to the prep table and gather the ingredients. The ingredients today are 4 buttermilk biscuits, garlic herb pizza sauce, mozzarella cheese, pepperoni, and a little bit of egg white. Okay. So the first thing we're going to be doing is to sprinkle the white and red cutting board using this. Just kind of lightly sprinkle it with flour. You don't want so much flour that you're going to taste the flour when you're using your biscuit. Okay, so I take my first biscuit. I'm just going to lightly press it into the flour so that we get a little bit of flour on both sides, and that prevents our rolling pin from sticking. Okay? You're going to have to put a little muscle into it, and you're trying to make a rounded piece. Now, if you notice my cutting board is slipping, one thing you can do is you can take a damp towel and you can place it underneath your cutting board like this, and that should prevent a lot of the slipping. It's just a little trick. You can use a damp paper towel or a regular towel. Let's maybe zoom in on what that is supposed to look like. Okay, so it's supposed to be rounded. Doesn't have to be perfectly round. Once you get it slightly rounded, you're going to just set it apart over on the yellow cutting board. And then you'll move your flour around and you'll get your next one going here. And you can kind of start to press them with your hands. Notice that it kind of attaches to the cutting board. That's okay. Or to the rolling pin. That's okay. And again, it does not have to be perfectly round. You're just looking for a rounded shape. Just set them aside. Do a little bit more flour here. If you use too much flour, your biscuits have a very kind of dull flour taste, as opposed to the buttermilk biscuit taste they're supposed to have. Don't be afraid to put a little muscle into rolling it out. The larger they are, if you roll these out and they're not very large, your calzone comes out very dense and it's not very light and fluffy. So the larger you can get these, the better your finished product is going to be. Okay. So last one here. These are the Pillsbury buttermilk biscuits. You can use a store brand, Kroger, or any of those brands that might be on sale. Okay, this is a pretty economical dish to make for your family, and it's very tasty. Okay, so once you get those finished up, you can just kind of wipe down your cutting board. Get most of the flour off of it. Doesn't have to be perfect, but most of the flour off of it. And now you're going to be cutting your pepperoni. Okay, and your pepperoni is is cut using your kitchen shears. You can also cut pepperoni with a knife, but I find this is just like cutting with scissors, and most students are a little bit more comfortable with this than they are using a knife, at least to start. These are pretty sharp, and you don't have to cut the pepperoni into any kind of shape, just so that it's cut into small pieces so that when you sprinkle it on the calzone, it spreads out nice and evenly, and you don't bite into a huge hunk of pepperoni. Okay, if you've just got little, almost pepperoni flakes, they work better. You could also add other ingredients to this. Pretty much anything that you use to top a pizza would do. You could put Canadian bacon and pineapple in them. You could put mushrooms, olives, anything that jalapenos, anything that you really like on a pizza would work inside the calzone. But for our purposes, we're just going to be doing the pepperoni. Okay, so once I get that done, I'm just going to put those back into here. I'm going to set this cutting board aside, and I'm going to start building my calzone. Okay, you'll notice that your baking sheet has a silicone baking mat on it. If you don't have a baking mat at home, you can use parchment paper, or you can use butter or something to grease the pan so that the calzone doesn't stick. I like to use these silicone baking sheets. Okay. So the next step, you're going to take a small spoon, any size spoon will do, and you're going to only spread your pizza sauce, okay, or your tomato sauce onto half of the calzone, okay? You don't want to put it all over in the middle, and you want to stay a little ways away from the edge. The reason is when you seal it, if you're too close to the edge, the sauce comes out, and then they aren't quite as pretty. They still taste as good, but they aren't quite as pretty if the sauce comes out the sides. Okay, so you want to stay about halfway there. Use all of your sauce because this is what makes them tasty. Okay. Then you can take a little bit of your cheese, sprinkle it on top of the sauce. You're going to just save a little bit of cheese. So you divide up your cheese within each one. Then you're going to also just sprinkle a little bit of pepperoni and spread that out into each one like this. You want them to be fairly even. Now if someone in your group doesn't like pepperoni or doesn't eat pepperoni, then you can always use some extras for other people in the group. Okay? So once you do that, notice that I have a little bit of cheese left in here. This is going to be used a little bit later on in the process. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold these in half like this, and then I'm going to do what's called fork sealing. Okay, I'm going to seal the edges using my fork. Okay, so you just lightly press down all the way around on the edges, and then it's all sealed, and you can place them onto your baking sheet. Okay. And again, it doesn't really matter if they're perfectly round because they're going to cook into a nice shape. Okay, you want to leave enough room that when they expand a little bit while they're cooking, that when they're baking in the oven, they will spread out just a little bit. Now notice that I got a little bit of sauce too close to the edges. And like I said, not a big deal. It just won't look quite as pretty. And you can wipe it up a little bit before you put it into the oven and clean that up. You do want to make sure that it's sealed all the way around, because if it's not sealed all the way around, what happens is it will open up during the cooking process and you'll lose some of your ingredients. Okay? Now, after you get your calzone on your baking tray, The next thing you want to do is you want to take a little bit of egg whites, okay, and your basting brush, and you want to baste them. Just baste a little bit, okay? It'll be nice and shiny on the top. The reason that we do this is because it makes them nice and golden brown when they're baking. It gives them a nice shiny kind of a top, so they look prettier, and it keeps them nice and moist while they're baking. Okay, so you want to do that. All right, next thing you're gonna do is you're going to place these in the oven. Okay, using your oven gloves, open your oven from the side all the way. Put them in. And set your timer for 13 minutes. Now, once that 13 minutes is up, you'll be opening your oven again. You'll be taking the calzone out, and you will be carefully placing a little bit of the cheese onto the top. Now the calzone are very, very hot, okay, because they've just come out of the oven. So you'll be placing those, just a little bit of cheese. Again, kind of like the cilantro in the salsa recipe, you're going to be placing a little bit of cheese just for garnish to make it look good. Then you're gonna place those back in the oven. For about a minute. At the end of that minute, they will come out and they'll be nice and golden brown and have a little bit of cheese melted on the top of them. As they come out of the oven, you're going to use your cooling rack. Okay, your cooling rack is here, and you're going to use your large flipper. Okay, you're going to take them from the tray and you're going to put them on your cooling rack, and you're going to leave them there for about 2 or 3 minutes just to cool off. The reason we use a cooling rack is because the air flows under it and it enables them to cool down a little bit better. Another thing that I usually recommend students do is cut the calzone in half before they put them in the boats, because if you don't, students will bite into them and that sauce gets extremely hot inside. Okay, so I would suggest doing that. So when your timer goes off, you're going to take those out. And they've melted just a little bit. The cheese has melted just a little bit on the top. Okay. Then you're going to use, like I said, your spatula. You're going to lift them onto here. And again, you're going to let them cool for a couple of minutes. After they've cooled down, you're going to take your boats, and I will cut one in half so that you can have an idea of what it looks like. Again, you would let them sit for 2 or 3 minutes. And you're going to cut them in half. Ooh, very hot. Place them in the boat and enjoy your calzone.